Hello, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for joining us for today's presentation, 12 Steps to Splunk Success, presented by Aditum. My name is Roxanne Napoli. I'm a digital marketing manager here at Aditum, and I'll be your host for today's session. I have just a couple of housekeeping items for you before we begin. We have an hour-long session planned for you today. About 40 to 45 minutes of that will be our presentation, and then we're going to allow 15 minutes for questions at the end of the session. Please type any questions in the questions area of your screen. You can do that at any point, either as you think of them during the presentation or at the end during our Q&A session. Either way, we'll answer them for you at the end. This presentation is being recorded, and we'll be providing the slides and the recording to you by the end of the week, so keep an eye on your inbox for that. And please take our survey as you exit the webinar today. That's a great way to give us your feedback on today's content, and also let us know if you have any ideas for future sessions. Before we begin, I'd like to take a minute to introduce our presenter for today. Your presenter today is Jim Barge, and Jim is the founder and managing partner here at Aditum, and he's going to give you a company overview in just a minute. And on a day-to-day basis, Jim is responsible for our company vision and direction, and he's placed customer success right at the top of our list of core values. Over the past 18 months, Jim has been heavily involved with Aditum's professional services team, our customers, and our partners in developing better ways to deploy Splunk and ensure ongoing success with the platform. And today he's going to share some of the highlights from that work. So Jim has a lot of great ideas and resources to share with you today, and I'm going to turn things over to him to get started. Jim?
Roxanne, thanks for the introduction, and I absolutely would like to thank everybody who's attending today. This morning, Roxanne said, Jim, is there anything you'd like me to change about your introduction? And I said, could you put some more hair on my photo? And she said, I'm sorry, I can't help you with that. So, some things. But so today we are going to talk about 12 steps to Splunk success. Roxanne mentioned that I have a bunch of ideas, but fact of the matter is these are really generated from our senior professional services, Splunk professional services consultants that are customer-facing on a daily basis. We're going to do a brief overview of who Aditum is. We're going to talk about where these principles were generated, who these principles apply to. We'll get into the 12 steps to Splunk success. As Roxanne said, we'll save some time at the end for Q&A. And if at any point during the webinar there seems to be a topic that piques your interest, you can send an email today or at any point to service@aditumpartners.com and let us know what you may need help with. Our general philosophy is, there are common issues across customers. There are solutions out there, and when you can't get to those solutions yourself, we're here to help. So looking forward to that. A little bit about Aditum just to start out. We're a boutique, Splunk-only professional services firm. It's a small team of highly focused experts. We have 13 Splunk certified consultants and growing. It makes us actually one of the largest Splunk professional services firms in North America, believe it or not. One of the hallmarks of our PS team members is the tenure. Our average PS team member has 15 years plus of industry experience, 3+ years of Splunk. That's essentially like dog years, as Splunk is a relatively new technology. From a firm perspective, we do also assist with software license evaluation and acquisition. We recently launched co-managed Splunk services for those people that like to outsource administration. We're based in sunny Tampa, Florida. We do service customers nationally. We have PS staff from Washington, D.C. to Kansas City, out to Los Angeles and San Diego, really all over the map. And really our value add, we do not see ourselves as simply what I would call tool experts with Splunk. We do possess the Splunk subject matter expertise, but we also marry that with domain expertise. So the gentlemen, the folks that are on our PS staff, they have expertise in IT security, ops, DevOps, business analytics, and we really marry those two things to get the best value to customers. And really the most important thing that I'd like to share here, because it's not something that you really can glean from a company website, is our staff is relentlessly focused on customer success. Probably the biggest thing that I heard this year that captured it perfectly, we brought all of our professional services team members to an all-in team meeting in July, and John Papp, our professional services manager, who had come over from another PS organization, said, I constantly heard the word utilization at my last PS organization, but in all the years I worked there, I never heard the phrase customer success. and that's all we talk about here. So we're really driven by getting the most value out of the platform for customers. In terms of how these principles were generated, this is really interesting. In late spring, we gathered our lead Splunk engineers in our Tampa headquarters, and I really wanted to answer two questions. Where do you see organizations struggling with Splunk? What are their hurdles? And then what suggestions for improvements do you have? And then what came out of that was really a formal prescriptive methodology or process to drive customer success. And then we kind of started branding that the success plan for Splunk. This meeting actually started out by us wanting to figure out how we could drive better professional services engagements, but then it really broadened out beyond the PS work that we do and the broader customer experience as a whole. Now, who these principles apply to, there's probably a good cross-section on the call today between Splunk admins and Splunk users. The principles you're going to hear today kind of apply to both, some more towards one end of the spectrum to the other. It absolutely, all of these principles, I'd say, apply to IT leaders who are responsible for outcomes, whether they be business outcomes or investment outcomes. You want to make sure you're getting the most out of the solutions that you bring into your organization. And everything we're going to discuss today is I'd say, applicable to all use cases and all vertical markets. The one thing I'd ask you today is just find 2 or 3 key takeaways that you think could be most applicable to your own organization. Focus on them. All 10 may not apply to you, but I'm certainly sure the things we're going to talk about today, there are going to be 2 or 3 that you can really start working on by the time we hang up the phone today, so focus on that. We'll get right into the success steps, and again, these are from our professional services consultants that are out there interfacing with customers every day. So if you're wondering what's going on in other organizations just like your own and to do some peer benchmarking, the first success step, you have to develop a training plan around Splunk. The feedback that I get from our professional service consultants, and this is the one singular point that virtually every one of our professional services engineers recognizes as an impediment to Splunk success, is that admins and analysts are inadequately trained on the software. They don't have a sufficient understanding of Splunk, how it works, whether that be the front end with SPL or the back end architecture. It seems that the organizations don't put enough emphasis on training. So our recommendation is to develop a formal training plan, list out all your Splunk users and admins, document a formal training plan, execute on that training plan, run it like a project management plan, if you will, make sure things are getting accomplished. That could be formal or informal training in terms of how it's delivered. There's a lot of different resources that are available to customers, and I'll share that in a minute. And just be committed to it. You have to be committed to it. If you think about it, if you said, I'll spend 2.5% of my time doing personal development, that's an hour a week, maybe less, depending on how many hours you work in a week. But people absolutely have to balance fighting their daily fires in the role that you're kind of sitting in and making kind of strategic advances in your own personal knowledge base. So this is high on the list of all my consultants. I love the saying in the bottom left-hand corner, if you think education is expensive, try ignorance. We all need to get better on a daily basis. To put some numbers on how prevalent a problem this lack of training is, I did a survey of our PS staff earlier in the week. I asked 12 guys. One I don't think has enough time in the seat. He came from a corporate Splunk background, but for the guys that have an extensive amount of PS experience under their belt, I said on and they didn't know, by the way, why I was asking these questions. I just sent out the survey. I didn't want them steering answers based upon, geez, I wonder what Jim's looking to hear. I was just, give me your best shot at where you think the correct answers are. On a 1 to 10 scale, with 10 being the highest, how would you assess the overall Splunk capabilities of the typical Splunk user within our customers? The answer was a 3.25 on a 10 scale. 1 was a sheer beginner. 10 was someone they viewed as a subject matter expert that could probably be delivering professional services. 3.25, I'd say, you could probably tag that as people being, woefully undertrained or underprepared on the product, and there's a lot of opportunity there. When you look at the same question applied to Splunk admins, it wasn't much better. It was slightly better, but not much better. They rate the typical corporate Splunk admin at a 4.25. Don't get offended if you're an expert or if you're a part of Splunk Trust. This is an aggregation. I ask my guys on the whole, but this is, again, there's a lot of white space to the right, and people need, I'd say, much better enablement. I'd also like to point out, we sell training, but that's not really the business we're in. This is not a pitch to sell training. Splunk pays partners a very narrow margin to sell training. That's not the objective here. The objective here is just to make people aware that this is a big area of improvement for customers, whether you're on the admin or user side. There is a list of training resources here, and Roxanne mentioned she is going to make the webinar available to people in hard copy when we're off the phone here. But if you look at some of these things, Splunk offers some free courses for both users and admins. The free Splunk Fundamentals 1. Our professional services consultants prefer that users take that course before they show up to deliver services, so there's some foundational knowledge from the user community. There's Splunk Infrastructure Overview, which is a starting point for admins. I don't think a lot of people are aware of this book that's in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, Exploring Splunk. This book, it's more like a brief white paper, was written by the third employee who was ever employed at Splunk. In the bottom left-hand corner, you could see where you can go on the Splunk website to download that ebook. We talk about all-day in-house user workshops. You can accomplish that in two ways. What we typically find is there's one Splunk power user in your user community. That's the person that really takes to Splunk, digs in with SPL. You should encourage some sort of formal lunch and learn where that power user is sitting down with other Splunk users to knowledge share on SPL. And you could also leverage partners or Splunk. Splunk's own sales engineers will do workshops for customers where they'll come in for 4 to 8 hours, and work with your users on Splunk. The second success step is not only to get educated with Splunk, but to tailor your training to your specific use cases, workflows, and data. Our professional services manager, John Papp, feels very strongly that Splunk users can take foundational courses in Splunk from Splunk EDU, but they may still not connect the dots on how to apply that training to their data and their environment. So some of the recommendations we make here, if you do engage PS, you may want to think about carving out some of that PS time for EDU. I'll give you an example. Our PS guys feel that there's a lot of customers that concentrate a lot on data ingestion, come in for 40 hours, bring in these data sources. That's not the value of Splunk. You do want to get that data into the platform, but once it's there, the users have to know what to do with it. They have to know how to work with the front end of Splunk. So we're putting together an SOW right now, this week as a matter of fact, where the customer said, I'd like you to come in and ingest 8 new data sources into Splunk. It's going to be for a team of 30 middleware engineers. They don't know the tool. They've never used Splunk before. So we said, look, rather than spend 40 hours focused on data ingestion, let's spend 2.5 of those days focused on data ingestion, a day and a half on dashboarding and front-end analytics with those folks, and a good 4 to 8 hours where we bring all or as many of those 30 middleware engineers and DBAs into the room as we can, and we'll give them custom training on the tool. It's a much more cost-effective way to train because everybody's sitting in a room, you're working with your data, it's much more meaningful, but don't fall into the trap of just ingesting data into Splunk and then kind of leaving it for the end users to figure out what to do with it. You have to learn SPL and you have to learn how to use the front end of Splunk. Success step number 3, don't overlook tuning. This is a big one. Again, I think customers concentrate on getting data into Splunk. With ES, there's out-of-the-box correlation searches, and if you were to just go and turn all those correlation searches on, there's very few security analysts or SOC teams that would be able to handle all of those alerts. Those alerts or queries have to be tuned, so you reduce the false positives, you reduce the white noise. This is absolutely an area that customers overlook. It used to be that even the most minor ES engagements would be a 4-week engagement, and the 4th week was focused on tuning due to customers, I'm sure, feeling professional services is a bit expensive. They've kind of tried to push that back to 3 weeks. The tuning doesn't get done, and again, it becomes more of an exercise of stand up Splunk, stand up ES, get the data into Splunk. But this becomes a big issue. You're going to overwhelm your analyst, whether it's a NOC analyst, SOC analyst, any sort of end user, and then that those alerts are going to become white noise and fairly meaningless. So you need to work in the tuning, whether it's through professional services or through your own internal corporate users. Again, this is pretty telling here. I did ask this question of our professional services consultants in the survey that I did earlier in the week. And this is a simple 1 to 5 scale that rates the level of importance or focus that customers are putting on tuning. 5 would be the highest score here, where customers are optimizing, getting the most value out of Splunk in this area. 1 would be not nearly enough concern about tuning to their detriment, and it's a 2.08 on that 5 scale. 75% of the 12 PS consultants that participated in the survey rated customers a 1 or 2 in this area. 75% rated customers a 1 or 2 in this area. There was no consultants that rated customers a 4 or 5 in this area. So again, you could get significant uptick in your use of Splunk by spending more time focused on tuning. And this is a comment from one of my senior professional services consultants, just kind of pointing out, if you were to just go on and turn on a lot of the out-of-the-box correlation searches or alerts within Splunk, a majority of them will not be relevant to your end users based upon their use case or needs. A significant amount of tuning needs to take place. If you don't do that tuning and your end users do get overwhelmed with false positives, the key thing here is important information is going to get missed. The alerts that you want to see, the whole reason you're using Splunk in the first place, are going to get missed in a pile of alerts. They're just going to stop paying attention. So tune Splunk queries. Success step number 4, and I've kind of labeled this as 4A and 4B because they're closely tied together. And this is common. This is not one of the 12 guys, but several of our 12 Splunk SMEs saying that people look at Splunk too much on the product side and not more of a holistic view of what they're trying to do in their domain. That domain may be security, IT ops, DevOps. There really should be more of a strategic vision as to what they're trying to do in that domain, what problems they're trying to solve, and then tied to that is really use case exploration. Again, what are we trying to accomplish here? So the solution here, right, is to kind of ask the why, play the business analyst, ask the questions: what problems are we trying to solve? What are we looking to accomplish? What do we consider successful outcomes? What made us go this route of buying the product if we own it today, or evaluating the product in the first place? You will generally start to come to some answers there, but there are some customers that have trouble answering those questions. They're not sure. They look at our PS consultants and they'll literally say, "I'm not sure. I thought those were the things you were going to tell me that Splunk could accomplish for me." And so if you look at the second check mark there, leverage the free Splunk Essentials apps. Splunk has a couple free apps, Security Essentials and Infrastructure Essentials, that have several hundred out-of-the-box use cases. And our PS consultants will walk customers through those apps, and you can certainly do this on your own. You walk through those apps, and it's a really good exploratory exercise of saying, what are the things that I should be concerned with? What are the problems that I could be solving? It's a standard part of our practice now that we implement those Essentials apps for our customers. They don't replace other apps. They're more of a business discussion that are overlaid within the product, and again, they're free and available on Splunk Base. We encourage people to leverage industry standards. For instance, you can map the CAS critical security controls into Splunk. There's actually an app for that within Splunk. So again, the idea is the tool doesn't operate on a standalone basis, but what you're doing is you're mapping the tool and integrating the tool to specific use cases and problems that you're trying to solve. We always suggest trying to talk about maturity road mapping in an iterative sense. You take small bites out of the apple, you constantly improve. And the last bullet point there, organizations may consider investing in a use case workshop. It's a fairly new offering from professional services. Splunk PS offers it, as does our own PS team. We have some guys that were specifically trained on that. It's hands off the keyboard time, where a domain SME will come into your organization and ask these questions, play the analyst, what are your security challenges, how can we solve them, what data sources might be needed to solve those problems, and you're given an artifact or a document at the end of that engagement that essentially becomes a roadmap for what you should be doing from a security perspective, not a tool perspective, but from a security perspective, and then certainly how you could wrap the tool around that roadmap. Success step number 5, you have to evaluate workflows. A lot of people implement the product without any consideration to the workflows around the product. And I'll give you a good example. Bill Ouellette, one of our senior engineers who's on this call, is at a customer this week. We did not sell them Splunk, but we were asked to come in and do professional services. And they've bought core Splunk and ES, and they do not have a single security analyst within their 4 walls. So you have to ask those questions. What should be alerted? Well, that's dictated by your security policy. Are those policies defined? Who responds to alerts? When they get an alert, what do they do with them? There's all these workflows that have to be integrated with the tool. You cannot look at the tool or the product, whether it's Splunk or any other product, in a vacuum. And so, start thinking about those security policies and those workflows. And I will point one thing out. I talk a lot about security here because that's a domain that I'm personally more comfortable with. But you can interchange whether it's DevOps, IT Ops, business analytics, all the major Splunk use cases. These same principles apply across all those use cases. Success step number 6, and this is a big one. Take an enterprise level view. Splunk is meant to be a cross-enterprise machine data platform, and I do not mean to sound like a marketing person or a marketing message for Splunk, but I will say it again because it's critical. Splunk is really meant to be a cross-enterprise machine data platform. It's not meant to be a point solution, although certainly it can be used as a point solution. You can use it as a point solution, but you're leaving a lot of value on the table if you stop there. So the idea is repurpose your data. As most people know, Splunk is licensed based upon data ingestion. Once you get the data in, it's paid for. You can use that data and analyze that data as much as you'd like and can. So the idea is, what other problems can we be solving in the organization, and how can we reduce the cost per use case? Splunk starts to look a lot less expensive when it's viewed in that manner. Now, this is a tough one because it requires you to break down silos that may exist in your company today. And obviously, we find the larger the company, the greater the culture of silos. And it might be a little difficult to drive collaboration. And so some suggestions around that. You have to take an iterative approach again. You have to find the wins, right? You'll find the low-hanging fruit. You start with other colleagues or teams that either have significant pains, you know them to be friendly, you know that they're folks that are cared more about the name on the front of the jersey, not the back of the jersey. And depending on the size of your organization, Splunk really recommends leveraging a center of excellence approach where basically there's a centralized team that's responsible for the platform administration, but of course across multiple users, use cases, and within that COE is somebody that's responsible for communicating and evangelizing what Splunk can do in other departments. What's really crazy is when Splunk is used by a corporation and other departments don't even know that the tool is within their own 4 walls. To me, that's tragic because there's business value that's just being left all over the field, and that business value should be picked up. Again, putting a number on it, I did ask our PS staff, again, interfacing with customers on a daily basis, what percentage of customers seem to be collaborating with other technology departments that might benefit from Splunk and not simply using the tool in their own silo? 37%. I view all that white space between the star and 100 as opportunity within your organization to drive incremental value with a product that you've already paid for. It may require some additional data ingestion. It may not. You just have to look at those use cases and look at data sources. One of the big points that John Papp, our PS manager, makes about why this is so important, there are likely other teams within your environment that have paid for similar tools, and they didn't need to do that. They're in many cases using the same exact log feeds, but with another log tool. And from a cost perspective, that just doesn't make sense. So think through a collaborative, enterprise-wide view of how the platform could be used. Now, if by chance you kind of need more of a selfish reason to do that, the what's in it for me, why not have other groups or departments sharing the cost of your tool? If you can get collaboration across these silos and get other groups paying for a tool that you may already be using, it does hopefully free up some budget that you can do other things within your department. Maybe it allows you to hire another analyst. So again, food for thought if you needed it. Success step number 7, and I hope you guys are getting some value out of these. There's some really good stuff here, and again, I appreciate our professional services team bringing this knowledge to bear. You have to utilize new or little-known features within Splunk. Our PS team absolutely feels that users and admins are not taking full advantage of the product. When I asked, well, give me some examples of that, you could see on your screen some of those examples. And then I asked the next question. I'm always peeling back the onion. So I said, John, so you listed out some things you feel customers aren't using, they're not aware of. Put some numbers on it. So you see HTTP event collector, John feels 60 to 70% of customers not utilizing the function. The one that really sticks out to me is adaptive response, or AR, which comes with ES. I had a conversation with Bill Olette yesterday evening where he said in the 1 year that he's been doing professional services, he's done Splunk prior to coming into PS. In the 1 year that he's been doing PS work, and specifically ES work, there hasn't been a single ES customer that's implemented adaptive response, which he says is crazy. To Bill's point, and I think this was a funny comment, Bill says that's the equivalent of buying a flying car, never flying it, possibly never driving it, and maybe just sitting in the car and smelling it. So you have to get the most value out of Splunk. Success step number 8. This is a big one. We see it all the time, especially in mid-market customers. You have Splunk admins that are wearing too many hats, and based on that, they're not giving the platform the necessary care and feeding that's required. So the easy solution, despite the daily fires that you're putting out, you absolutely, as an admin, have to put in the daily care and feeding of Splunk. To give you an idea, before Bill joined our organization, I remember him telling me he wore 7 different hats at the organization where he came from. Splunk admin was one of them. Despite that, he always put 8 to 10 hours a week into platform administration. He had to. By contrast, and let me share a data point here. Splunk best practices recommends that if you're at a terabyte of daily data ingestion, that requires 1 full-time Splunk admin. So keep that in mind. A terabyte of data, 1 full-time Splunk admin. Not sure how that scales down for smaller customers, but the example I want to give you is we have a customer that's a half a terabyte customer, and their Splunk admin says he wears 6 or 7 different hats. He does engineering on other products. He says he's lucky if he spends 5% of his time on Splunk administration, which works out to be about 2 hours per week. It's just not enough time. It's no surprise that he's really struggling with Splunk. They are not getting the best value out of the product. That would really need to change. What are some of the ways that you could put care and feeding into the product, or more care and feeding? Let's talk about old-fashioned time management. Again, we all have fires to fight. Our calendar gets ahead of us, but people need to block out time and calendar maintenance. Sometimes you can train users in SPL. In some environments, the users are responsible for SPL. In other environments, we've talked to Splunk admins who generate queries for the end user community. And so the admin can relieve some of their duties if they can train the end users on SPL, or certainly at least find a power user that has the interest and desire to kind of take that on. It'll give you more hours back in your week. If those things just aren't going to happen, if you're just working a 40, 45, 50-hour week and not able to get to this, you probably should consider some alternatives like Splunk Cloud. This will solve a majority, but not all of your admin duties. You're still going to be responsible for things like syslog servers, but a lot of the Splunk admin duties will go away. You may also want to consider Splunk managed services, where somebody's doing platform administration on your behalf. Success step number 9. You have to prevent data loss. This is like a cardinal sin, right? You can't lose your data, and especially for compliance reasons. Our PS consultants feel that if a customer hasn't had professional services at any point, they're probably struggling with this problem. They say the math can get pretty complicated, especially if you introduce clustering to your environment. So again, how do you prevent data loss? You have to calculate reasonable expected data and storage needs. Within that calculation, you have to properly configure Splunk volumes. You cannot just simply, have the data retention set to the defaults that come with Splunk out of the box. That will probably lead to some problems at some point. Issues, you can get data drops, or a more common problem is disk overflows, where basically incoming events will be backed up, is probably the best way to put it, and not find its way into Splunk. Admins can configure alerts to let them know or make them aware when the disk comes close to overflowing. And as a backup, you can always configure archiving if the disk were to fill up, and that prevents permanent data loss. That's kind of more on the admin side as opposed to the users. Success step number 10. People have to learn absolutely how to get out of the technical weeds and talk business value. I was at a recent sales meeting. I have to share this because I had an out-of-body experience. I went up to Atlanta with one of my sales reps. We met one of our better customers. I sat in a conference room with a customer, really the technical champion, who is a Splunk admin, we'll call him. And I observed that Splunk admin and my sales rep have an hour-long conversation about universal folders, heavy folders, dealing with replication across data centers, and not at any point during that conversation did they talk about what they were trying to accomplish with Splunk. And the moral of that story is they were trying to displace Elk in a different team. So I'm not sure if a lot of customers know that there are some free tools available. When I say tools, I mean people and teams within Splunk that can help you talk more on the business side of what Splunk can accomplish. So as most Splunk users understand what a powerful tool it is, but the technologists may have a difficult time explaining that value to their C-level executives who kind of control the purse strings of a budget. And so Splunk has a team called Business Value Consulting, the BVC team, and they're responsible for coming into organizations and talking about, let's put numbers on what Splunk can accomplish for you, cost savings, impacts to customer experiences, reduced expenses. And the BVC team can come up with something called the IVA, or Interactive Value Assessment. And again, these are C-level reports that talk about the financial side of Splunk, and it's a free service. So I'd really encourage anybody, if they're struggling with this, to contact us. We can put you in touch with the right people at Splunk. It doesn't cost anything. You can see on the next slide, show me the ROI. I love this thing, Jerry McGuire. You can see a comment from a senior Splunk customer up top. What you see in the bottom right corner is a bit of that interactive value assessment. There's a whole catalog of data that the BVC team collects to say this was the Splunk, this was the environment before, this was the environment after, and here's a numeric quantifiable kind of risk rating of what Splunk was able to accomplish in your environment. Going back to our PS survey, which I love, I asked our PS consultants what percentage of customers you perform work for have executive dashboards in place for company leadership, because one thing I didn't mention on the previous slide is you could also be using executive dashboards which consolidate KPIs or key security indicators so the executives have a good idea of what's going on in your environment and how that environment is trending. We'd also recommend you guys actually always put executive dashboards in place, because then your executives will start to see the value in Splunk from their level in the organization. 23% of the customers that we walk into for the first time have executive dashboards in place. I'd say a little under 8 out of 10 do not. There's a lot of opportunity here to get the executives in front of Splunk and seeing the value. Success step number 11, we've got a few more, is data enrichment. Adding context to your data or logs. The raw data that comes out of Splunk may not be relevant to users. If you got a senior engineer, they may understand what an event code means. So for instance, you may get a Windows event log, code 4624. Code 4624 is an account logon. A NOC analyst may not know what 4624 is. So with Splunk, you can add context to your data by kind of giving it a kind of a plain English explanation of what these codes stand for. Users are really less concerned about the log message itself as opposed to what that log message actually means, especially if you're dealing with NOC and SOC analysts. So we would absolutely talk about putting context to your data. Data enrichment is kind of what Splunk calls it. There's another concept in Splunk called lookups that's tied to this, and we'd bake that into your best practices. Success step number 12. Leverage helping hands. And what is helping hands? We notice that when we go into Splunk customers for the first time, some are working, we'll say, swimmingly. There's other customers that they're hitting some hurdle of some sort. And so we came up with a program called Helping Hands where we give a couple hours of professional services time complimentary to customers if they've hit some sort of hurdle. The idea is to leverage our PS staff to get you over any little hump. Now, we're not going to say that we're able to solve all your problems in 2 hours. That's not practical. But at least if there's some significant issues you're dealing with, it may be a starting point. So I would say to reach out to Aditum if you find yourself stuck to some degree, and we'll give you a couple hours of complimentary services time up front in the spirit of generating a relationship and helping you get unstuck. We want you to get the value out of the platform. It goes back to being obsessed with customer success. When I say use the right Splunk partner, Splunk has over 300 partners. If you go to their website, there's a lot of partners, just like any major product. I'll put them in two buckets. There are what I would call transactional partners. They sell the product. They may not have qualified people on staff to deliver the product. And then I put us in a different bucket. There's that term value-added reseller or VAR. We like to say here that we're putting the V and the A back in VAR. The value add is what matters to customers. Anybody can sell you the product. You need hand-holding and technical and domain guidance along the way. Leverage professional services, and then leverage our success plan for Splunk. So we're going to talk about what that is briefly. Before I do that, I want to give you a taste of a recent customer engagement we did, because this is amazing to me. There was a really poor end-user experience that one of our customers was living through. This is not normal with Splunk, but the fact is, as you add more data integrations into Splunk, as you add more users, as those users add more queries, alerts, reports, dashboards, or as you add more components to Splunk, whether those components be search heads or indexers, things get messy over time. This is why Splunk or any enterprise-level tool requires proper administration. So we were called into this customer where end users were, they were waiting 30-plus minutes for reports to generate. Our PS consultant got that down to 1.5 seconds. How can you reduce your, mean time to response on an e-commerce site from 12 hours down to 2? These are the things that PS does. If you're just really stuck, at some point I would say, it just pays to bring PS in. There's no reason for users to be getting this sort of experience with the platform. And we talk about the success plan for Splunk, and I'm almost through. I'm going to turn it over to the Q&A. What you see in front of you is going back to that meeting in April when I brought our professional services leads to Tampa. Here's one criticism of PS, and it's not really a criticism of PS, but it's PS comes in and delivers. They hand the keys to the car to the customer, and then they leave. Right? Well, that's what PS does. But then the next question is, well, what does the customer do next? So we went through this exercise where we had just finished delivering PS to a customer, and I said, well, what next? If we're the customer, what activities and tasks do they need to do with Splunk to get the most value out of the platform? My PS guy started listing those things out. I said, okay, now that we've listed them out, we're the customer, prioritize them. PS leaves. What's the first thing that needs to be done in month 1? What's month 2? What we did is we codified all this into a prescriptive plan, and that's what we call the success plan for Splunk. So if you look at kind of the do-it-yourself, you maintain the Splunk platform, and on the other end of the spectrum, there are companies that outsource Splunk administration to a managed services provider. The success plan for Splunk sits in the middle. You're responsible for your environment, but you work with one of our SMEs 1 or 2 times per month. They're just giving you over-the-shoulder guidance via phone calls, and they're also delivering some work that's off those phone calls. It's essentially kind of having a personal trainer as you advance with Splunk. It's an amazing program, and people are really taking to it. Customers are taking to it. So if you have any interest, please let us know. We think it's a home run in terms of generating business value for you guys. The last piece, success with Splunk, right? Here's two photos that I really love. The one on the left, we went into a customer that had bought the license and it was shelfware. They weren't doing anything with it. That's tragic. It's too powerful of a tool to not be used or not be used properly. If you apply some or all the principles that we've talked about today, we think your experience will be more like that one on the right. It should be a pretty fast race car, or to Bill's perspective, maybe a flying car. I don't know, chitty chitty bang bang perhaps. And the last piece that I'd say, excuse me, is be deliberate, be disciplined. A lot of the things that we've talked about today are human elements. They're not technical things, right? Our PS guys can give you tech tips all day long, but a lot of this, what we discussed today, talks about the human elements of getting the most out of the tool. So with that, I believe I'm going to turn it back to Roxanne.
Thank you, Jim. Thanks for taking us through all of those steps for success and all of those great tips and ideas. And I'm sure that everyone who joined today is going to take away some great actionable things that they can take back to their organizations to improve their success with Splunk. So as Jim mentioned, it is just about time for Q&A. On the next slide, I have just a few reminders for you before we jump into the Q&A session. First, again, is that the session was recorded and you'll receive the recording and a copy of the slides by the end of this week. So I know Jim had some really good links and some contact information in the slides, so you'll have that and you'll be able to access it. Also, as many of you know, next week is .conf, and we will be there. We have a pretty big team that will be attending .conf, and we'll also be at booth M17 in the Source Pavilion. So we'll be there, and we'd love to meet you in person. Also, if you're interested in improving your success with Splunk, something that's very important for you to know is that we'll be giving away 2 of our success plans for Splunk at the conference. So definitely plan to stop by our booth and learn how you can enter to win one of those. If you're not going to be attending .conf, October 24th, we'll be doing a webinar on .conf takeaways. And then also on our regular webinar schedule, November 5th, we have a managed services overview. So there's a lot coming up, and just stay tuned to your inbox for that. We'll be sending you invitations so you can join. On the next slide, we have contact information. So again, if you need to reach out to us for any of the programs that Jim talked to us, you can visit us at aditumpartners.com. You can fill out a web form there. And then there's also our email address, which is service@aditumpartners.com. So it is time for Q&A at this point. And I do want to also introduce Bill Ouellette. Jim mentioned him a few times throughout the presentation, and he's one of our senior consultants. He's on the line as well to help answer your questions. So if you do have any more technical questions, Bill's here to help with that. So this is a really good chance to get some of your questions answered. You have access to both Jim and Bill. So the first question is for Bill. Are there any best practices to follow when looking to ingest AppDynamic app stats into Splunk?
Thank you for the question, Roxanne. I actually personally have not dealt with the AppDynamics app itself, dealing with any of the customers. I do kind of stick on the enterprise security side, but I definitely do recommend always going to Splunk base and going to the details on the apps that are involved and taking a look at the documentation. I'm not sure if that app is actually a Splunk built app or if it is a third-party built app. But a lot of the time, the documentation that is involved with the Splunk built apps is really good. It can be a lot of information to read through, but I highly recommend that when you are dealing with a new data source, that you read through all of it carefully and fully understand what it's actually trying to tell you on the admin side. There are some intricacies with some of the data that you're going to be ingesting, that whether you're dealing with heavy forwarders or search head or indexers, wherever the data is being parsed properly, that you understand that and get the best value out of the data.
Yeah, this is Jim. I'm going to add something to that. This is the interesting thing, and I would say one of the difficult things about Splunk, it's not only the various domains that Splunk could be used for, but it's all of those data integrations, right? If you think about the fact that Splunk can ingest any sort of machine data, and there's 1,000 or 1,500 Splunk apps. When it comes to any individual engineer or Splunk professional services consultant, it's not only have you worked with this premium app or have you worked with this domain, you can even get down into the nitty gritty of have you worked with this particular data source or this particular app or TA. So the person that did ask that question, what I would ask you to do, because I want you to get value out of being on the webinar, and we appreciate you being here, if you send an email to service@aditumpartners.com, when this webinar is over, I will find out which of our 12 PS consultants have worked with App Dynamics, and I will put you in touch with that PS consultant, no charge, helping hands. You guys can get a direct line of communication going with an email exchange or a quick phone call. And any questions that you have, we can get somebody on the phone that has App Dynamics experience. That's a beauty of having a 13-person PS team. Somebody within our team has worked with a particular data source. If not the guy on the left or the guy on the right, it's going to be somebody two seats down.
Perfect. Thank you, Jim, and thank you, Bill. Next question. How can I approach other teams to get value out of Splunk if I have their data? Jim, do you want to start with that, and then we can hand it over to Bill next?
Yeah, so again, we talked about that a little bit in the slide, and that could be tough, right? Because one of the points that I didn't address in the webinar today is one of the hurdles to success with Splunk sometimes is lack of what I'll call lack of customer engagement. I'm going to laugh a little bit. Bill was out on a professional services project where the customer asked him to go take a walk around the lake for 2 hours because he had overbooked and had a few other things on his Outlook calendar. And I just shake my head and I think, my God, that's crazy. It drives Bill nuts too, because Bill's a guy who really cares about delivering value for the customer. So just recognize that you are going to have the inherent starting point of some people, caring more or less. There's also the inherent starting point of some people preferring other tools and having different habits and way of doing things. I think, like anything in life, the key is showing value. If somebody has a pain point and you can address that pain point, you'll probably get their attention. And I'll say this, the bigger the pain, right? So there's a difference between somebody needing a vitamin and an aspirin. If I've got a migraine headache, I've got to reach for the aspirin. I know vitamins should be good for me. It doesn't mean I take them every day. So if you can identify any pains across the organization, maybe take somebody to lunch from the team and say, what are you guys dealing with? Again, it goes back to use case exploration. What are you guys dealing with? What are some of the problems you'd like to solve? And then you can kind of back into, is that something that I could help that person with? I would start with that conversation as opposed to, hey, I've got this tool called Splunk. The initial reaction may be, oh man, I've got to go learn this. I don't know anything about it. Start the conversation with what problems are you having? And I'm going to turn it over to Bill. You've been in front of the customers. Maybe think, Bill, if you've been in a situation where you have seen that collaboration across customers, and maybe what you saw in those organizations that perhaps brought those walls down.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Jim. The situation that comes to mind here for me for the admin that is trying to get the best utilization out of this tool is what are the other use cases that the other teams might have? Maybe you know that you have the infrastructure team server data coming in and you're utilizing the data for something else. They're not utilizing Splunk. Maybe approach them and ask them what their biggest pain point is, or just ask for a specific use case. Sometimes you might not be able to go directly to them due to silos, and you may be able to approach your incident response manager for your organization or someone else that might have that information, and you can kind of put the items together and say, okay, maybe I can approach them with, we can solve this issue for them. Really, it kind of just gets you into maybe you need more of their data, maybe you're a security team and you need more of the web team's data, but you're not able to get it. Try to find out a point where it says, hey, we can solve this issue together, and then I'll get a value out of it because I need your web data for security, and you'll get value out of it because you'll be able to search your own web logs for certain issues. One issue that I can actually remember where I reached out to a different team when I was at my previous organization was they were having web issues on a website, and I had heard about it, so I kind of reached out and we were able to work on the issue together to find out it wasn't something on their side, it was on a server side of the web application that was actually causing the issue. And they weren't able to find that resolution for about 3 months, and we were quickly able to figure it out within a few days. So sometimes it's really just being investigative with other teams and investigative in your own mind to try to help others out.
Great, thank you, Bill. We do have one more question that's come in. If you do have any questions at this point, now's the time to submit them. We still have a few minutes left, so we'd be happy to address anything else that comes in. But for now, the last one that we have is, I'm going to direct to Jim. Is your success plan for Splunk the same as Splunk's customer success offering?
No, actually, Splunk does have something called the Customer Success Program. That our offering is different in several ways. Splunk's Customer Success Program, number one, I believe it's only available to customers that are ingesting a 0.5 terabyte of data or more per day. I think there's like a 500 gigabyte minimum limit. It's kind of designed for larger customers. And I want to say it's less prescriptive. What Splunk does is they make available a certain bucket of hours to customers, and they also make available what they call, I believe they call it admin on demand. The difference, I'd say, with our program is it's prescriptive. We've listed out the tasks that we're going to walk customers through in kind of a, let me take your hand and bring you into the future, as opposed to saying, call us if you're encountering any issues. So it's definitely, there's, I would say, a lot more coaching and best practices involved, as opposed to being more reactive and waiting for customers to call with issues, is probably the biggest difference between the two.
Great, thank you, Jim. Those are all the questions that we've had come in during the presentation today. So I'd like to thank all of you for submitting your questions. And also, Jim and Bill, thank you for answering and participating in the Q&A session. At this point, we're just about ready to wrap up. Jim, do you have anything else you'd like to say before we wrap up?
I'd just like to thank everybody for taking the time to be on the webinar. There's people that care. They want to move their organization forward. They want to move their career forward, their own knowledge base. It takes time. It takes commitment. It's the human elements that are going to make you successful at Splunk. It's the training. It's the best practices. It's the knowledge sharing. So I would just like to say, thank you for everybody for attending, and please do not reach out to us by phone or email for any help, and utilize our Helping Hands program as a way to begin a relationship and leverage some of our free initial help.
Great, thank you, Jim. And thank you everyone for attending today. We appreciate you participating in the webinar. Again, you'll get your recording and your slides by the end of the week. That'll go out to everyone who registered. And also remember, if you're going to .conf next week, be sure to stop by and meet us. We'll be there and we'll be very excited to meet you too. At this point, you can log out. The session is over for today, so you can log out of the GoToWebinar and have a great day. Thanks everyone, goodbye.